what is the right age? That's probably the question I get asked the most at parent nights. What's the right age for my child to have a phone? We're going to be in a teacher shortage for a while here in America, and I'm going to guess that's to the Western world. And I think part of that is our messaging about what it is to be a teacher.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. My name is Trisha Friedman, and I am joined by my incredible co-host, Jeff Udick. This episode, we're doing something a little bit different. I am actually going to get the joy and pleasure and privilege of interviewing Jeff. We co-facilitate things all the time, but we also have our own little special interest projects that we work on, and we wanted to kind of just demonstrate that curiosity and respond to some questions that we've had from newsletter subscribers who know, Jeff, that you've been doing and leading this work, but they've got kind of some questions about what is it? So are you ready, my friend, to have the tables turned and I get to interview you?
Yeah, let's do this. This is a great passion of mine right now, and we're seeing a lot of good leverage on it. So,
well, Jeff, when it comes to leading learning around understanding our generational differences, I guess, and our similarities, this has been something that you've had requested from numerous places. Let's just go total basics. When we're talking about a school needing to understand generations, why? What are you talking about when you're talking about that?
Yeah, so I think where this all started really was, we'll make sure to link it in the show notes, but the great research done by Dana Boyd called The Social Lives, the Network Lives of Teens. And we'll make sure the research, it's free research that Dana Boyd, incredible researcher around this, did. And the research came out quite a few years ago now. And it started with me doing parent nights and talking to parents about the generation of their children and why, quote unquote, kids today are the way kids are today. From there, I dug deep into this. And this is back when I was in the classroom. So I taught millennials, I taught Gen Zers. And to be an educator, to reflect on why these kids are the way they are, have so much to do with their social upbringing. And every generation has a different social upbringing because there is different pressure on parents. So that is, over the years, I've gotten into this to the point where now I'm doing a lot of stuff on leadership of how are you a leader with millennials? How are you a leader with Gen Z? And now that millennials, their oldest of them are just 40, 41 years old. Gen Zers are now in the workplace. There are young professionals in the workplace. I'm even doing more and more with, say, the state of Alaska, going up and talking about how do you recruit and retain this next generation of employees. And that's a lot of the work I'm doing now. Is I'm actually doing a lot of work both in education and out of education around understanding our differences, because there are 4 generations in the workplace right now. And this has never happened in America, in American culture. And this is every Western culture, not just America, but every Western culture. We now have 4 generations in the workplace. You have baby boomers, who many of them, we're still here in America, make up roughly 45% of the workforce. You've got Gen Xers, that's my generation and your generation. We're a small, quiet generation, but we are very good leaders. We're very good problem solvers because of how we were raised. You've got the millennials, who are now make up almost 60% of our employee base. And you've got Gen Zers coming on strong as our young employers. And they're asking things different from their companies. They're asking things different from their leaders. And even still today, we have Gen Zers are our middle school, high school kids. Like the end of the Gen Z is 14 years old. So as a middle school, high school teacher, understanding what this generation expects from their educational system is crucial to understanding why they're not engaged in class, why we are seeing classroom management being very, very frustrated. And this is even in the elementary school. We're seeing a lot of classroom management frustrations at all levels, because we have a generation that expects something different. And if you don't understand that, if you don't step back and look at where that pressure is coming from, why that expectation is different, how the system needs to change, or they are forcing it to change, it just allows us to understand each other better and to build instruction inside classrooms, build instruction that actually meets the needs that engage a generation of students.
And I'm guessing some of that work requires you to help leaders see that when we talk about it being different, it's a different world for different generations, right? So I'm kind of wondering if there are different ways that you really bring that home for people, because I feel like it's accelerated and the differences are starker than they were. Like, I feel like, we're Gen X. I feel like our generation had a little bit more in common with the generation before us in a way that the one after us didn't. An example of that comes to my mind is I had someone who I was working with, they're quite younger than me. I was driving, they got into the car, I had the radio on, and she started laughing. And I was like, what? And she was like, I never knew people like actually listen to radio. I thought that was like a thing that just happens in like TV and movies. And I was like, I listen to the radio all the time. She's like, wow, I've never been in a car with the radio on before.
Yeah.
So are there ways that you kind of help folks understand this is how different it is? Like, have you thought about, because I can only imagine, Jeff, that sometimes there is a resistance of, but they have to do it this way because that's how I did it. And that flexibility of getting, it is a different world.
Yeah. To your same point, my nephew and niece are 8 and 6. They love watching commercials when they're over at our house and we have like YouTube TV on or something. They love the commercials because they never see them. They go into Netflix and they're just watching things, or on YouTube, they're watching things. They never have commercials. So to actually see commercials, they want the volume on and they want to watch commercials. They find them so fascinating. But to your point, this is where we can dig into this a little bit. And I think digging into this for you and I that are that Gen X, that there are some big differences. For, my tagline, Trisha, and this, my tagline is preparing them for our future, not our past. And so often we get caught into that idea of, this is how it was when I was their age, or I had to do that when I was their age, so they should have to do it too. And it's almost like a rite of passage that you had to, quote unquote, jump through the hoops. Now, that idea of jumping through hoops is something that our generation was told. Our parents, mostly boomers and the silent generation, told us, look, there are just hoops you have to jump through. Buckle up and just go do it, right? You have a generation now in schools that aren't going to do it. Their parents aren't telling them they have to do it. Their parents will tell them like, well, that's stupid. Don't do that. Or their parents will go fight for them to not jump through the hoops. So you have that. You have another idea, and I think one of the big ones for us as being Gen Xers is that we were the generation that were the first, what they called free range children. For the majority of us Gen Xers, now between the ages of, what are we now? We're between the ages of like 46 and 55, something like that. We were the generation that for the majority of us in the Western world, both parents were in the workplace for the first time ever, which meant for the majority of us, we got to spend a lot of time in our formative years, think late elementary, middle school, all by ourselves. One of the things I love to do in my trainings, and I just like every time I do this, I'll ask all the Gen Xers, raise your hand, at what age did you spend 1 hour at home without any adult supervision? Trisha, when was that for you? 1 hour home with no adult supervision.
Probably 9 or 10, I think. Yeah.
So, on average, for our generation, it's 9 years old. 9 years old, we spent 1 hour at home without adult supervision. By age 12, the majority of our generation was babysitting younger kids.
Yeah.
At age 12, I can't find any 12-year-old who is allowed to go babysit younger kids, or parents of younger kids that would ever trust a 12-year-old with their younger kids. But see, we did that. Our generation, like by 10, 12 years old, we were taking care of little kids, and parents were, needed a babysitter, and you went down, I walked three houses down and babysat the kids while the parents went out. You can't find that today. There is not a child being raised today that has a babysitter that's 12 or 13. There's not children today that have a babysitter. We have before school programs. We have after school programs. If you do have a babysitter, the majority, specifically here in America, the majority of those babysitters are actually a relative. We don't trust people outside of our core family anymore. If we do, we want to have a background check on them. We want to have the nanny cam in the house so we can see exactly what's happening. That alone is a completely different way of being raised. So if you're a Gen Xer and you're a teacher, you're saying to yourself, what's wrong with these kids today? They don't know how to be alone. And you're 100% right. They don't know how to be alone because they've never been alone. Gen Xers will look at kids today and say, oh my gosh, I was so much more mature than these kids were. Yes, because you spent hours by yourself taking care of yourself or your younger siblings at ages 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This generation doesn't have that experience. This generation hasn't been alone. In fact, for Generation Z, which are our middle school kids and high school kids, the average age that one of them gets to spend 1 hour at their house, not out with friends, 1 hour at home without adult supervision, the average age is 15. So in 2 generations, we've gone from the average age of being 9 to the average age of being 15. And if you just think about the difference that is culturally, it impacts everything about the way that we look at these different generations. And as a teacher, I need to understand they didn't have the same upbringing as I did. They didn't get to spend their entire middle school years by themselves.
Yeah.
Which is why on the flip side, Gen Xers, we don't like to do group work. We like to work alone. Gen X, our generation, is the generation that is pushing the work at home movement. They want to go back to the workforce. Millennials, Gen Zers, they like doing group work. They love doing group work because we made them do group work in school and all school was group work. They love doing group work even when they're employees. Gen Xers, we don't like it. We want to sit at home where we can watch our children and we can work from home. We don't need the culture of the office. Just let us be. That's just the way Gen Xers are. Just let us be, because our years growing up, our formative years, those middle school, late elementary, middle school, and even high school years, we spend a lot of time by ourselves. We don't mind being by ourselves at home on a screen. And all of these things that I'm talking about are coming on employees. They're coming in companies. They're in our classrooms. And understanding that and breaking that down is critical to understanding how do you create engaging lessons for them, not for me, preparing them for their future, not my past.
I think that's a real tension, because as you're describing the differences, and again, if we're thinking about social media, I think the easiest thing to do is go to a place of judgment and but there's a right way, when it just is. And I wonder, what learning do you think we need to be doing around avoid the judgment trap? I feel like that's something, as you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, it's always these kids these days, right? Like, how many times are we going to echo that versus realize it just is, right? Like, you don't have to say my childhood was necessarily better than yours, or there's a right way to raise kids. Everything is contextual. So what does it mean to get to that stance of like just understanding it is? And if you go from that rather than go from judgment, to me, I think, as you said, like, it's about working with them as a learning designer, not against.
And I think there's a lot of things that, to your point, that are playing into this. Every generation believes the technology of the new generation is going to destroy them. Us being Gen Xers, perfect example. We were the TV generation. We watched so much TV that our brains were supposed to melt. I mean, literally, that was everybody's biggest concern. And it didn't happen. Is social media, are there issues with social media? 100%. Is it reconfiguring what this generation does? Yes. But at the same time, they need it. They need to understand how social media works, because it is a huge impact into their lives. It's a huge impact in who they're going to be. You take the social media net, and this is one thing that I do with schools. You take the one social media platform called LinkedIn. LinkedIn here in America is responsible for 94% of job applications.
Wow.
That is a social media platform.
Wow.
That if you don't understand how to use it, you're not going to get hired. On the flip side, if you understand how to use it, it's a game changer for people. 94% of all hires have some type of LinkedIn connection here in America. And the crazy part is, in order to set up a LinkedIn profile, you have to be 16 years old. So what we need to be doing is teaching kids, how do you leverage social media? How do you truly create an amazing, impactful post? How do you write a resume, not on paper, because nobody wants a paper resume anymore. They want your LinkedIn resume. And why is not every senior across America and across the Western world graduating with a LinkedIn profile? That is being future ready. That's being future ready. And it's social media. But instead, we're going to ban all social media. We're going to tell kids that it's this horrible thing. And we set up these roadblocks where then we aren't allowed to teach them the responsible way to use it, the right way to use it, the media literacy that needs to happen. And then we have issues. This is my biggest issue right now with phone-free schools. I am already hearing from teachers who are in phone-free schools that are thankful for phone-free schools. Not so much that the phones aren't there, but that they don't have to teach about social media. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to teach about media literacy anymore. Whew, I can take that one up. No, you can't. It's still important. Just because we got rid of the device doesn't mean it goes away. And here's the crazy part. There has been absolutely no research to show that phone-free schools actually reduces the amount of time children are on phones or social media. If somebody can find the evidence, send it to me. But there has been no research to show that giving up the phone during the school day actually reduces social media consumption or the amount of time kids are spending on the internet.
You know, this is anecdotally that a lot of parents now are struggling with their child wants to stay up all night on social media because of the in-school ban. But, you know, that reminds me of the parental generational piece too, that every generation of parents has completely new challenges and new pressures that you pointed to,
and new social norms.
And new social norms. You know, to be a parent 2 generations ago is so different.
Yeah.
Does some of the work that you do also address that audience? Because, you know, I'm even thinking of the number of times I will hear someone who's a grandparent voice some frustrations with the way their child is parenting. And again, this is not new. I think this has been a thing that's happening. I do think it's more significant now because parenting is a lot different now. What's the parent piece in this learning, do you think?
So I think the parent piece in the learning is understanding that whenever you decide, this is one of the things I like to tell parents, whenever you decide is the right time for your child to have a phone, is the right time for your child to have a phone. There's so much pressure specifically around cell phones with parents that I constantly hear about. But that's one of the things is that they're trying to figure out what is the right age. It's probably the question I get asked the most at parent nights. What's the right age for my child to have a phone? And the right age is when you feel like they're responsible enough. That's it. Trust your gut. There isn't any specific age. The only guidelines that we have from the American Pediatric Association, who's a trusted organization, they say no screens, 0 screens before the age of 5. Now that's not happening, right? Where the average child in America touches a connected device for the first time at 18 months after the pandemic, down from 2 years before the pandemic, even though the American Pediatric Society says no screens until age 5. Then it should be limited to less than 2 hours between ages 5 and 7. And then after age 7, they're like, it's on you. So there's no age. So I think there's a lot of pressure on parents of, well, when do I allow them to have social media? When do I allow them to have a phone? And there's so much pressure within society and within schools. I know there are some schools where the parents have come together and said, we're not going to let any of our kids have a phone until grade 8. And you only need a couple of those parents to break that rule, or the grandparents don't know the rule happens, so the grandparents buy the phone or whatever it happens, and the whole thing falls apart. So I do think there's a lot of pressure to understand that. But I think you also need to understand as a parent that social media, for better or for worse, is where kids gather. It's where kids hang out. Our kids are so overscheduled today that they don't get to go to the mall. And many malls don't allow kids to go hang out there. So the only place kids can hang out are in their video games, which I have a lot of parents that say, yeah, my kid goes up and plays video games because they're talking with their friends. It's where they hang out. It's like being at the mall, only they're sitting on their rear up in their bedroom. So understand that there's more to social media than just doom scrolling. But just like our parents limited it for us, you limit it for the kids. Whatever rights for your child. 30 minutes, an hour. My parents would drop us off at the mall and we were there for an hour, and then we got picked up by some other parent. That was it. We didn't get to spend hours at the mall. You had to spend an hour hanging out with your friends, and then you had to go back and do whatever it was you needed to do. So I think there's a lot of those things we can look at and we can take from our own experiences, but think about the space is different, but the ideas are the same.
I am so jealous, Jeff, of anybody that's been at one of your sessions when you're doing kind of a deep dive into this, I'm wondering if in closing, somebody who's listening and is saying like, we got to bring this to our district. We've got to bring this to our school. Can you maybe just give us a few, like, what are a few of the headlines of like, this is a training I offer. Here's how long it takes. And what you're hearing back, because I know you're hearing back from folks on the difference it makes all the time.
Yeah, there's a couple things. I mean, the one that seems to be going really well right now is a talk I'm doing called Generational AI, which talks about all the differences of these generations. What does that mean for schools? What does that mean for us working together as educators? Why are kids different today? And what can we do to leverage that? And then I wrap it up by talking about we are the generations in the AI era. And so it's going to be on us. And every generation brings a different outlook to AI. I even talk about, the DEI work. And Trisha, I know you're big into DEIJ work. And when we do that kind of work, we need to lean on our younger generations who truly understand. And I mean, really soak in this idea of DEI. Like they are our generations of DEI. And so we need to make sure we're in our schools, making sure that we make them a part of that, make them a part of those discussions and conversations we're having in schools. So that's a big one that I'm doing. I do one, I'm doing a lot right now around recruiting. We know we're in a teacher shortage. We're going to be in a teacher shortage for a while here in America, and I'm going to guess the rest of the Western world. And I think part of that is our messaging about what it is to be a teacher is messaging for boomers and Xers. And we have not changed our messaging for Gen Zers and the generation that's coming after them, Gen Alpha. And so that's a lot of the work that I'm doing now. And I'm also doing work. I'm doing more and more work in the corporate world. I've worked with Fortune 100 companies around this idea of generational leadership. When we're talking either superintendent or principals, what does it mean when you have 4 generations in your workplace and the way that you are trying to move your organization forward and having to understand the generational differences that are in front of you, even in a staff meeting? I know principals who've been in a staff meeting and you have to try to engage a 24-year-old and a 65-year-old. And those generations are so far apart. How do you make sure that you are able to talk to both ends of that spectrum? So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing. You can reach out. There's more over on my website as well. You can see a lot of the stuff over there. And I'll be sharing more on LinkedIn around this. It looks like I have a conference coming up that we're putting on in Kansas in May around generational leadership, around understanding, trust, and impact with 2 other consultants that I'm doing, that I'm working with. So I'll be looking for some information around that too. But thank you for just taking time to talk about this, because I love AI and the education side, but usually when this is the interesting thing, companies or schools will bring me in to do a keynote on AI. And I don't like to keynote AI because it's a tool. It's like standing up there and saying, I've got this new amazing thing called a pencil and talking an hour on a pencil. You can't talk an hour on a tool. You've got to be hands-on with tools. So my AI sessions are always hands-on. So I do generational AI as the keynote, and every single district, it is the one thing they talk about, because understanding each other, understanding the human is priority number 1 before we ever have to worry about what AI is going to do.
That makes so much sense to me, Jeff, because it's also, when you're talking about generations and you're talking about AI, it's that reminder of the world changes, right? So that hand in hand totally makes sense. And I think it's sort of I think about how our communication needs change and shift and how vital that is. So if you're in education and you're still communicating with parents and caregivers the way that you did 15 years ago, you're probably noticing people aren't reading that content. It has to, everything's got to evolve. That's right. The world evolves, right? And we're part of that. So that makes perfect sense. Yeah, we'll make sure those links are over there in the show notes. Thank you, Jeff, for just letting me kind of dig in and ask you questions about this new, very important work that you're leading.
Thanks, Trisha. And we'll do more of it here on Shifting Schools. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I wanted to remind you not to miss out on our webinar series happening April 17th that we're calling Unlock the Power of AI for K-12 Learning. Join us for 3 engaging 45-minute webinars designed for future-facing educators like you. Can't make it live? No problem. Your ticket includes access to all the recordings. Remember to use code SSPOD25 at checkout to save $25 on registration. If you have a team of 5 or more who would like to join us, contact us for our team rate. You can learn more and register at shiftingschools.com. Hope to see you there April 17th.